All right, everybody. Well, that was another terrible loss by the Chicago Bears this season. Seems like we're getting pretty used to this, so I think I'm a little bit emotionally numb to it. It's not like we were playing for anything, honestly, so it doesn't hurt as bad. Andy Dalton, 4 picks. Reese, what was your analysis of the Red Rifles' performance today? I know that he's a very controversial figure within the Bears fandom. Many people are saying, hey, he might be the guy for the long term, and others are saying, hey, he might be on the road to an MVP this season. Reese, takes.
I know the conditions were a little bit tricky. It wasn't optimal. It wasn't a 60-degree, kind of just a little bit breezy day here in Chicago. It was a little bit more freeze and rain, but at the same time, I saw Kyler Murray, and he wasn't perfect, but he laid a couple balls into receivers that were, didn't look like the conditions affected him too much, especially for someone that this is the second time playing in the rain. And, Dalton, 2 of those picks, probably not so much. I mean, the first pick was pretty much his fault. It was a poorly thrown ball. The Komet tip,
not his fault.
Not quite his fault, but still, to rack up 4 picks in a game was not optimal. But I can't say that I'm completely surprised. I mean, this just looked like a very simple Bears offense. I mean, the chosen play was to get the running back out into the flat, that being David Montgomery, and throw it to him. That was really the chosen play of the game. So it was nothing too complex. And I think the real bright spot, the happiest Bears fans were the people that had David Montgomery on their own fantasy team. And everyone else just kind of watched a pretty typical Bears performance, at least for this year.
Yeah, the sad thing is I can't say that I'm exactly surprised either. I think what's so sad about this game, though, is I felt like the Bears offense outside of Dalton played a pretty complete game. They kind of were what they should have been all season, which is like control the ball, do some nice swing passes. And then if we had Justin Fields in there, it would have been nice because we would have had kind of more of a balanced downfield component as well. Unfortunately, we have Andy Dalton, but still, Dalton, I mean, as bad as he played, he, for stretches of the game, was holding on to the ball, moving the ball efficiently. It looked like a much more efficient offense. As far as game plan goes, I think Matt Nagy actually did a good job. And it's rare to hear Matt Nagy support from me, like extremely rare. I've been calling for his firing many times since last year. So for the fact that me coming out and saying, hey, this is a good game plan, pretty good play calling, it was good. This good defense. Cardinals have a good defense. Obviously missing J.J. Watt, but still a really good defense. I think by DVOA, they're one of the top this year, have a lot of good defensive backs. They did a good job just by testing their tackling, getting David Montgomery, feeding David Montgomery the ball. David Montgomery looked fantastic today, looked really, really dominant. And it was unfortunate because it looked like the quarterback was working against Matt Nagy and David Montgomery. One of Matt Nagy's best play call. And by the way, he was play calling, by the way. So let's talk about that for a minute. He was play calling when Dalton's mic went down. Matt Nagy was using a radio to put in the call, so it was not laser. It looks like Nagy might have taken that play calling duties back. We'll get to that in a minute. But as far as probably one of Matt Nagy's most complete games as a head coach, as far as just how well the play calling was. We even had the little trick play that could have went disastrously, but Dalton actually kind of dug us out of a hole. I think it went to Joakim Grant somewhere like 30 yards on the field. It was a great play. Great play design, great play call, decent execution. Offensive line always working against us still. But yeah, it's unfortunate that Dalton did ruin that game for Matt Nagy because there's a very realistic possibility we end up winning that game if Dalton doesn't throw as many picks as he threw. We did a good job controlling the ball and playing decent defense with as many injuries as we've had.
Yeah, they were really inopportune turnovers, especially the Komet where he tipped it up. I mean, they were within the red zone at that instance. I think that Arizona didn't really have too hard of a time punching the ball into the end zone. So I think that if Arizona got into a bit tighter of the game, they could have put it on. I think they could have kept away from the Bears for the most part, but it certainly could have been a much closer game, in my opinion. But I know exactly where you're coming from there. As for Nagy calling the plays, I think it's just when he's with a quarterback like Dalton, it's it's just simpler for him. I think that he plays or play calls a little bit more within what feels natural to him. And I don't know if what we see with Justin Fields is something similar to what we saw with Mitchell Trubisky, where it seems like the offense gets completely changed for what's at hand. But I don't know. It just, I think that it's just easier for Matt Nagy, for whatever reason, when someone's like a typical pocket pass like that, for him to play call. So, I don't want to give him too much credit. I think that it could have been a closer game. It wasn't the worst game by the Bears this season at all. I mean, like you said, they at least look decent in stretches, but we've seen that in so many points this season where, this Bears team is good between really the 220s, especially on offense, on the football field. But anything else, if it's backed up within their own end or once they get into the red zone, it gets tricky for them. But luckily today, I will say, props to getting Jimmy Graham involved. Finally found him back in the red zone again. So, something that we should have seen a lot more earlier on this season.
I think the weird thing with Matt Nagy is he actually does want to push the ball downfield. But it's almost like when he knows that he can't do that anymore, he does a better job because he has a lot more balance to his play calling. Yeah. So with Justin Fields, I mean, obviously you want Justin Fields to hit as many deep passes as possible, but it also needs to be a balanced attack. And especially with the offensive line we have, this is what doesn't get discussed enough. The offensive line we have doesn't allow Justin Fields to play to his strengths well enough because they don't give him enough time for these deep passing throws to develop. That's why when you see the Bears make a good deep passing play, it's typically when Justin Fields is extending the play himself. It's just this offensive line. Sam Mustipher sucks. Could barely snap the ball today. Jason Peters.
It's like this isn't high school. Come on, man.
Yeah, terrible. I know it's a wet ball, but like, come on. I mean, you don't have a hard job. Jason Peters, as good as he's been for us, he's also an older guy. He's not holding players in check as much as he used to. Larry Borom will get beat here or there. Same with James Daniels and Cody Whitehair. I think there's just a lot of instability because of that center position being so off. So that's why I think Matt Nagy sometimes looks a little more confident of a play caller with Andy Dalton, is because he just knows that he's not really going to be able to make that happen. So he focuses so much on making the easy game happen. Whereas, and that's also why we saw Mitchell Trubisky have a little bit of success with us at the end of last year, is because he gave up on the idea that Mitch would ever develop into this franchise quarterback and started focusing more on just making plays happen to essentially save his job. If Matt Nagy could have a more balanced attack in his play calling, where not only is he able to call these deep passes, but also is able to work the short game, I think it would be great. I know Justin Fields could develop a little bit closer on those like little out routes, like 3-4 yard out routes. I know also like the one thing that I couldn't understand is they did such a good job today with having the blitz killer package. On every single play, they had a blitz killer with David Montgomery rolling out. Where are these with Justin Fields?
Yeah, that was.
It's always spread out wide. It's like that is like the number one thing you want for a rookie quarterback. Kyler Murray had it all day long too.
Yeah,
it's just
he scored a touchdown.
That's like that's just the weird. That's just such a weird thing with me with Matt Nagy, is he's so bipolar in the way he calls plays. So it's either everything we're going, all spread offense, no running back. We're not even going to have a tight end, or maybe we'll have a chip block, maybe not, depends. Or it's like we're going to go all heavy set, we're going to run the ball. It's like there's no in between. It's so predictable in that manner when it comes to having Justin Fields in the game.
Yeah, like literally the first play of the game, it's like, oh, we brought in extra linemen. It's the first play of the game, 1st and 10 here. I wonder what the Bears are going to do. And I understand establishing the run. I mean, that's huge. We're even seeing that come back into the NFL more. I think the run game, lost its importance significantly about 3 to 5 years ago. And then now it's already swinging its head back around. I mean, look at what the Patriots are doing. Look at some of these other teams in the league. So I get the want to establish a run like that. And the Bears have, played their best when they have a balanced offense. And look at today, they're able to drive the ball down the field well, especially when they put it on the legs of Montgomery. But yeah, it's a complete puzzle to me why we don't see that with Justin Fields, especially on just how many dump offs we saw to Montgomery today, where he's able to pick up close to 10 yards or 8 yards. And when that's a 1st and 2nd down play, that puts you so far ahead of schedule. And that's why we've been able to see the Bears just kind of to stay on top of things like that. It just seems like when whoever's play calling, whether it be Bill Lazor or the little bit that we saw Matt Nagy do the play calling for Justin Fields, it's like for whatever reason we're not doing that. The offense always seems so off schedule, and just the simple things early on, it was getting extra people into the backfield to block. And then now where it's like in Justin Fields' progression, okay, give him that check down so he can go ahead and make that play. It doesn't seem to be available.
There was so much chip blocking today as well. Like, how many times was Cole Kmet chipping a wide receiver, chipping an edge rusher, and then just, falling out to the flat and catching a pass from Dalton? It happened all game long.
Yeah.
And that's like, those like 4 or 5 yard catches, they really, really add up. And exactly like you're saying, we get so behind schedule because it's the plays for Justin Fields are either a 20-yard catch downfield or him getting sacked. There's no in between with that. Even like having something like a late shallow crossing route. We saw a couple of those today. I think Rodney Adams was on one where he dropped it. I guess that wasn't as shallow, but it's like one of those things where it's like if you have a wide receiver,
or even a drag route,
It's like those are the easy things, like especially with like a zone, when they're in zone, which a lot of teams go into because of Justin Fields to control his mobility. It's one of those things where it's like these are common sense things, and that's what's so difficult with Matt Nagy is you'll see him have a game like this, and then the next week it's like, what are you doing? Matt Nagy, I don't necessarily think that he is a bad coach. I think he could find success elsewhere, but he's definitely a coach that needs an established quarterback. I don't have any faith that he's going to be able to develop Justin Fields. I know that we have seen growth in Justin Fields, but I don't really attribute that much to Matt Nagy. I think that's more so John DeFilippo, who's one of the best quarterback coaches in the NFL and someone that I hope we maintain for the next coaching staff.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that, over the course of the season, we saw progress with Justin Fields, and it's weird that no matter, even in a game that, Justin Fields didn't play, we're only seeing the shots of him on the sideline, that we're still talking about it. But I think it's just you have to note it because of how strange the disparity in play calling. And we saw it with Mitchell Trubisky and Chase Daniel, too. It was always two different Bears teams. It always has been. And I think the point that you hit at that was pretty right on is just like, Matt Nagy has a certain thing where if he feels like he needs to press it for whatever reason, like he did with Trubisky, like maybe he feels a little bit with Fields, or when a Chase Daniel comes into the ball game, he's kind of just like, okay, well, we're going to shorten things down a little, but it's still going to be somewhat sensible. We're still going to spread things around a little bit. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess another little small highlight, they are finding ways to use Jakeem Grant well as well. Getting him
and Bird today, man.
Demir Bird.
Where has he been all season? He had a bunch of great catches today.
Yeah, and I know some people in particular, especially some other Bears analysts, have been calling for him to get some more playing time. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think it's a playing time thing. I think it's a utilization thing. I think that Bill Lazor, as much as we saw a lot more competency when it came to balance when he came in, he's still a bad play caller. Like, he's still not good. Like, we still don't have a good play caller on this team. That's why he's never had a great offense. And it was, we can even go back to the hiring of him as a major flaw from Matt Nagy, because they hired him because he had experience with Nick Foles. He got fired from Cincinnati. We, instead of going and poaching or trying to get a better offensive coordinator, we just went after him because he had experience with Nick Foles. Now we don't even have Nick Foles on the team. Yes, he also had experience with Andy Dalton, which is probably why Andy Dalton ended up becoming a Bear anyways. But, it's just he's also not good. Matt Nagy, maybe if we had a good play caller as our offensive coordinator, he could be a good coach because he seems to be well liked in the locker room. But man, it's so bad. It's just the process, everything is bad. And it's sad that he had a good game as a head coach, in my opinion. The fact that how well we played despite having 4 interceptions and then our defense not having a single sack. That's incredible, truthfully. And really, though, it just points out more of his flaws. And that's the sad part is we do need to get a head coach, a new head coach. And I hope Matt Nagy the best, but like it's just too hot and cold. That's just always what it's been. And the other thing that he did well today, too, is how many times did we go for it on 4th down? And it worked almost every single time.
Yep.
It's like the passiveness, the rain today drew him out of his passiveness state. He couldn't depend on Cairo Santos because he knows with a wet field, you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that changed everything. And we saw an aggressive side. The conditions definitely, I think, brought out, in a weird way, it brought out the best in Matt Nagy today. in a very weird way. And I will say this, it's a shame that Justin Fields didn't play today. Because really the ultimate irony of this game that we haven't even hit on yet is that the offense that the Bears need was the offense they're playing against today. If you want like an offense that flows in a way that you're like, I wonder how the Bears offense should flow. How should we utilize players like Montgomery, who on the other sideline, James Conner, a bigger person, but plays the game a lot like David Montgomery. Even the Arizona Cardinals have a lot of pieces like Rondale Moore, shifty, quick guys that the Bears have and have loaded up on and use on their offense. And they utilize them. You saw that today in Arizona and how they're able to put up 30 points. It's like the Bears mold a lot of the players that they have on their roster. And even that's why Tony Romo a few weeks back is saying, I like a lot of the players I see on the Bears roster. It's not even an issue of the pieces. It's what you went on to earlier with utilization. And that's purely, I think that's where Matt Nagy has failed on this team. And we didn't quite get to see it today because we were watching the Andy Dalton offense, so it's a little bit different. But as far as just like wide receiver and passing scheme goes and utilization of the modern running game, you're looking at a team that's executing that better than you. So it's kind of almost like a take notes type of situation.
And the biggest thing that the Cardinals did today is they weren't even, like their offense from 20 to 20, they weren't even that good. Their offense today wasn't that good. I'm sure it was partially because of the conditions, partially because they just got Kyler Murray back after not having him a while, so he was probably settling it in. But what they did do is when they got in the 20, they scored, which is something that the Bears fail to do all the time. If you want to talk about the offense that was better between the 20s, it was the Bears today. Out of the Cardinals and the Bears, it was the Bears today. And the fact that the Bears moved the ball as well as they did, while Andy Dalton threw 4 picks, and we can say that this was a good offensive performance from the Bears, is really showing just how bad the play calling has been for Justin Fields. Because Justin Fields does everything on his own. He has no help from anybody. His wide receivers are dropping passes left and right. We saw that a little bit with Andy Dalton today. He has 8 picks off of 7 interceptable passes, which is just inexcusable. It's just showing you how many times the ball is hitting the receiver in the hands and going over. And it's not like what happened to Dalton today, where Fields are throwing the pass behind the wide receiver and the wide receiver is just trying to like get a hand on it to like try to bring it down. That's not what happens. It's multiple times for Justin Fields. I think I counted 5 of his interceptions. 5 of his 8 interceptions, it hit a wide receiver square in the hands. And it bounced right off of him. It's just it's laughable. Something that I do want to say though is Robert Quinn. It's kind of interesting. He might get credit for 2 sacks today, even though he didn't really have a sack, because he got the wildcat play as a tackle for loss. And those can be kind of weird because sometimes they record him as a tackle for loss. Sometimes they record him as a sack. So we need to see how that transpires. And when Kyler Murray fumbled the ball on like his first passing play, that was kind of hilarious because it just like slipped out of his hands and he jumped on the ball. Robert Quinn was the guy that tapped him down, and apparently he's going to get credited for that sack as well. So Robert Quinn, if he gets both of them, that's 13 sacks on the season. What a season for Robert Quinn, truthfully.
And that's damn near more than Khalil Mack's ever had on the Bears, correct?
Yeah, Khalil Mack had 12.5 in 2018. Yeah. He didn't play in like, the crazy thing though is he didn't play in like 4 games, or he played injured in like 4 games.
Yeah. But it's crazy that, Robert Quinn has kind of surpassed any mark that, and injuries have been a factor, but that Khalil Mack has set. And honestly, without him, and especially with the continued, injury problems that we've seen with Khalil Mack, man, this pass rush would be a little bit off. I do like what I see from people like Travis Gibson, But at the same time, if Robert Quinn wasn't playing the way he was playing, the Bears wouldn't be up there as a league leading team in sacks. I think that's pretty clear.
Yeah, certainly. Robert Quinn, I think a lot of Bears fans are sorry about that. Allen Robinson still didn't play today. Kind of have to wonder if he even wants to play. It's not like he had a significant injury. He just had a little pulled hamstring. And this is the third game he's missed from it.
It's interesting too how the timing of some of the reports came out too when you think about it. He had his podcast co-host buddy broke that news that no one in the locker room likes Nagy anymore, and then he gets this injury, and like he said, it's just a pulled hamstring. Things are lingering around. I think the motivation can at least be questioned. Not that I'm absolutely holding him to that and saying that he has no motivation.
Giving up on scramble drills for Fields too earlier in the season.
It's been a year to forget for Allen Robinson. I think that it's interesting how other fans haven't quite picked up on it. I think that it's kind of been pretty clear just where the effort levels have been this year, and be what it may, I'm not quite so certain that he even really wants to be here anymore, even though in the media, whenever he's talking to the press, he says he enjoys his time here. I think it's just a little bit of I don't know what even the saying is, but the whatever over the eyes, he's putting the cloth over the eyes just to blind you a little bit, and then when you pull that cloth back up, he's going to be on a different team this offseason.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's in the best interest of the Bears. Whereas all my Bears fans wanting to extend Allen Robinson to a $22 million 5-year contract, I hear crickets. I hear crickets. And I think that was one of the things we got criticized most this offseason is being like, hey, Allen Robinson's getting a lot of yards, but most of them are on RPO little catches. Like, I mean, granted, he's catching them, but still, it's like he doesn't look super dynamic. He's getting some contested catches, but he also was getting the ball ripped out of his hands sometimes. Had a weird thing where he didn't have a drop, which was kind of surprising. I guess they didn't, some of the passes they didn't count as a drop because they thought it was too arid, but like I'm pretty sure there was times where I saw drops from Allen Robinson. I think that Allen Robinson is exactly who I thought he was and who you thought he was last season. He's a number one wide receiver, but he's not a top 5 guy for sure.
No.
And I think that you could put a lot of guys in the conversation before you even say he's a top 10 guy either. He's just not dynamic enough. He's replaceable level talent.
That's exactly, I was going to say, what did we say this offseason that has shown itself to be so true this year is that he's a replaceable player. That's it, flat out.
Have we even? I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just saying, he's been gone. We've missed him a little bit, but it's not like he's been it's not like he's been showing off that much this season. And Darnell Mooney has been the better wide receiver out of the two of them. Clearly. When both Dalton and Fields is in the game, and like that is just like point proven. He made so much money off these little short passes, and now that the Bears are trying to be a little more dynamic in their play, he's not getting as much attention. He's not getting open as frequently. He's not getting the attention from the opposing teams that he was once getting. The other thing is, and I kind of want to bring this up, I know it's a little off topic, but Damiere Byrd, right, last season with the Patriots, had damn near 700 yards. This year with the Bears, this is like his first game that he's actually like been catching passes. If that's not indicting on the difference between the situation that Mac Jones and Justin Fields is in, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's nuts. And when it comes to, I don't even know. The whole receiving situation is just weird because it's frustrating, I feel like they're coming into this year, this should have been one of the best Bears passing seasons like ever. You look at this receiving core and you're like, wow, like they're actually low-key thick here. And even some of the additions they made a little bit later on, Jakeem Grant, that's starting to look like it's going to work a little bit. They have
Marquise Goodwin.
Marquise Goodwin has really shown in some games, then some games is just not quite there. And then, not to dabble back away from Damiere Byrd, but when it comes to Allen Robinson, I remember making a huge point at the beginning of the season saying, wow, Allen Robinson could come really close to breaking that Bears record this year. Well, he can forget about that. Like, that is long gone. So
way out the window.
It's interesting. Damiere Byrd, I mean, for his situation, it is odd that we've seen him get utilized so little. I guess we'll really see if he's going to be a person that stays with this team moving forward based on how he's utilized over the course of the rest of the season. But of course, it's going to be, I would hope, not likely the same coaching staff that's going to be there next year. So it's a really interesting situation. We got some players that are probably wanting to go out there and really fight for future roster spot, but might not be getting the shine of the current coaching staff.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that this is the one question before we round out the wide receiver talk I want to ask you. Would you right now rather have, this is going into next season. Next season, Allen Robinson is probably going to get a contract very similar to Mike Williams on the Chargers, and also Penn State wide receiver on the Bucs. I can't remember his name right now.
Godwin.
Godwin. I mean,
I'd rather have either of those options. Yes.
We're probably going to need to make a decision like this, and it wouldn't surprise me if we let Allen Robinson go. Who out of those guys would you rather have? Because for Mike Williams, the weird thing is with Mike Williams is as good as he's been, I mean, he's been really good in the red zone. He's a lot more dynamic of a receiver than Allen Robinson because though he's pretty big, he can catch some downfield passes too, which is nice.
A good amount of them, yeah.
And, he's kind of like he reminds me a little bit, this is going to sound like a weird comparison, but like the Derrick Henry of wide receivers, where he was super highly touted coming out of college, and he's kind of gotten better as the seasons went on, and he had kind of an interesting skill set for his size coming out, but he's gotten a lot better. But the question is he kind of still has underachieved a bit, I think for where he was drafted at least, whereas like Godwin, he's just been a really good guy, but he probably isn't as dynamic as Williams, whereas he's more of a guy like he's the best slot receiver in the league, and he has really good contact balance, and he can get some downfield passes too, but he's going to be a little more limited because he's probably mostly going to be a slot guy.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think with Godwin, like off the rip, like I like his game, and for the Bears, I would like it a little bit more. But then you kind of run into a little bit of an issue where it's like, well, sometimes Mooney likes to work out of the slot too. So do we need kind of two of like the players that are similar in like their playing style, or at least where they want to be lined up sometimes? I still think a Godwin and Mooney on your receiving core would be a great 1-2 100%. But the difference in style between like a Mike Williams and a Mooney would be very interesting to see out on the field too. With Mike Williams, I think kind of the way I think about him, if I had to compare him to another receiver, is kind of like an Andre Johnson type a little bit. He's just a bigger guy, but at the same time, he'll catch a ball on the sideline, and if he's got to step on the corner, he's probably still making it to the house. So he's not really sluggish either. But yeah, working the middle of the field, or he's not going to make some kind of real shifty move and beat a guy within the first 5 yards. It's usually a little bit more downfield. So it's a really interesting mix. I think I might lean a little bit more towards Mike Williams, but at the same time, like my first initial reaction would be, if I was just picking either of them out of a hat, I'd probably take Godwin, if that makes any sense.
I feel like Godwin's a better wide receiver, but I feel like Williams would be a better fit for Fields. Yeah. Because Williams is really good in the red zone. Like, doesn't he have like 10 touchdowns on the season already?
He's got a crazy amount. Yeah. I mean, I think he's good all the way in the field, but he's just not going to do anything really too much like intermediate work. And by intermediate, I don't mean like 15, but I mean like in that 5 to 15 range. That's just not really like his game.
No. It's not. He's but like that's the thing is like if we're trying to maximize Fields' deep ability, especially if we got to get a guy like Brian Dable who has someone like Stephon Diggs, which I know that they're not similar wide receivers, but still someone that's a big deep threat and kind of just a mismatch guy. I feel like Williams might be a better player, but that's the thing with Godwin. The weird thing I also worry about is having your number one wide receiver being mainly a slot guy. Like that's like the biggest concern with Godwin. But Godwin is just such a good wide receiver, man.
Oh, Godwin is great. Yeah.
He reminds me of like Jarvis Landry back when he was like really good on the Dolphins for a little bit. Like just like very prime, you know. But the criticism is like how much of an advantage is a guy that will just get you more frequently than not like 7 to 10 yards versus a receiver that can get some big plays and score a lot of touchdowns.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, the stat line, you might get 6 or 7 catches for 90 yards from Godwin and maybe 3 or 4 from Williams for, you know, that same yardage total or even more. And probably a couple touchdowns to go alongside of it, which maybe even just having that additional red zone help for this team would be great to actually give Justin Fields someone to throw the ball up to other than Jimmy Graham when they do decide to put him in that situation. So, yeah, it's an interesting question, though.